Today we're talking about archetype design, and we're going to start by looking at an example of bad archetype design. Back in 2014, I had the gall to publish not one, but two Channel Fireball articles on implementing life gain as an archetype in Cube, and people were pretty enthusiastic at the time. I remember somebody put in the comments that I should work for Wizards of the Coast, um, probably due to my willingness to publish design mistakes. But the archetype did have some good components. It had an interesting take on using life as a resource, but mostly people used it just to make big threats in the form of a Johnny's Pridemate or Archangel of Thune. And even then, there were some pretty fun play patterns. Zero and Orb gave you this undeniable Call of the Void where you would look at it while it was on the table and think to yourself, how much do I really need lands? And that was a fun all or nothing gambit that you don't really get with a lot of other archetypes. So the archetype was fun to pilot, it was powerful enough, but the reason that I cut it was because of draft dynamics. Typically, when someone starts a draft, they'll narrow in on the cards that they think are most powerful and pick from there, based on some mix of personal preference and raw power. But as you draft, the focus shifts towards conditional value. How good is this card given what I've already taken? Traditionally, people will call an archetype parasitic if it has a high quantity of cards that have a big gulf between their low raw power and their conditional power in the right deck. The problem, then, is that these archetypes have no real natural entry point. The only way to play it is to force it. And I actively tried to avoid this, but what I found is that it doesn't help for your archetype support to have decent raw power, because if there are better cards on offer, drafters will just take those instead. So even though there were some high power life gain cards, a lot of the support was relatively weak for my cube, and these cards would just wheel around the table until someone finally took them. And so you can see how power level matters. These same cards might not even be parasitic in a lower power cube, but it's hard to design an environment where, say, a Johnny's Pridemate and Luminarch Aspirant coexist. So what's the solution? Something I call good stuff with hooks. We're going to take Aristocrats as an example. So what is Aristocrats? You have two main components. You have the things that don't mind dying, and you have your sacrifice outlets. So we're going to start by filling our environment with main deckable examples of both of those. So you have cards like Kari Zev, Skyship Raider, which is a very efficient attacking creature. And you can play it just for that, but it does create this monkey every turn, and that monkey is a resource that you can generate to your advantage. And looking through the card pool, red has tons of creatures that don't mind dying. Black gives you some nice recursive options. And you can also pepper in things like Echo and Evoke, which give you bodies that are going to die anyways. And then add in some strong sacrifice outlets like Falcon Wrath and Woe Strider. And so far, all of these cards have been very main deckable, independent of any synergy. And the idea being that you could have, say, like a red aggro player who's picked up a bunch of these cards, and then all of a sudden they have a critical mass and can look at something like Carrion Feeder or Goblin Bombardment and realizing that, hey, this is actually really strong in the shell that I already have. And from there, we're going to keep fleshing out our design. Threaten effects are a great way to make your drafter feel pretty clever. If you've ever stolen someone's Titan and grafted it with a war gear, swung in, and then killed it by unattaching the war gear, that's super satisfying. Or taken somebody's firstborn only to feed it to the back half of your Cabal therapy. And from there you can go deep on plenty of amazing cards. I am a personal fan of Tuk Tuk, which this card does so much. It gives you Wrath protection. It can be played on defense as kind of like a pseudo moat because the opponent doesn't really want to give you a 5/5. And if you have a sack outlet, you can just attack in with it on turn 1 and then sack it and have a 5/5 ready to go once the summoning sickness is over. Planeswalkers are a great way to support an archetype through repeatable effects. I like Acolyte of Flame as a glue card between Aristocrats and Tempo, but I've also used the various Sarkhans in the past as repeatable threatens and sacrifice outlets. And whenever possible, I like to take the Magecraft approach to design, where if I'm implementing some mechanic, I want to put it into as many colors as I can, and also into different speeds of decks. And lately, Wizards has printed some really good sacrifice control options. I had to check that the cat was still alive. And you can support these with permanent spells that give you most of their value up front, but leave something behind to be sacrificed later. And my personal favorite in this department is Flagstones of Trocaire, which is a great glue card with my landfall themes and just gives you kind of a free card that you can sacrifice in these control-oriented decks. And then shifting over to green, you get some great non-creature sacrifice outlets, and these give you some really techie lines with the delve creatures in my environment. And the great thing about this type of design is since everything is pretty main deckable, you let your drafters find some natural synergies in the card pool, and it doesn't really feel like there's like the Aristocrats deck. I'm constantly surprised by combinations that my drafters put together, and it feels like when they put something fresh together that it's something they made and not something that I, as the designer, pigeonholed them into. The main takeaway being there are lots of strategies that you can find ways to make good enough for your cube. But if you're not careful about the power level of the individual cards that are forming those strategies, you'll find that if those cards are too weak, they'll only go into one specific deck. And this is really going to hurt the replayability of your format. It's going to limit the ways that different cards and themes can be combined. And when I first started cubing, I was way too focused on just seeing what I could make work. If you go through like the old MTGS forums, you'll see posts by me trying to make Dream Halls work or other weird cards. And just because it works doesn't mean it's good design. And I would also say just because it's bad design doesn't mean you should try it. You learn a lot by going off the beaten path and trying to make things work and figuring out why it did or didn't work, what was good about it. So I wouldn't be afraid to experiment. And hey, the card pool has changed a lot. Maybe even life gain can work in a well-designed way these days. That's it for today. Thank you for watching. If you liked it, feel free to subscribe and have a nice day.